Well, welcome. I'm excited to have author Jamie Ogle. Jamie, thank you for coming on to the show with me today and answering my deep diving questions.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's nice to meet you. So I have never met you before, so could you kind of tell me a little bit about yourself? I know you said you grew up in northern Minnesota. So.
Yep. Yeah, so I grew up in the Deer River area and just small town homeschool family. I'm the middle of 5 girls. And then we now currently live in central Iowa, just south of Des Moines. So
and Deer River, you said, is by
Grand Rapids.
Okay.
Yep.
Super. All right. So now tell us about the kind of books that you write.
So I write stories kind of set in church history, and I've always been drawn to these stories of like kind of dark times, and that's probably sad and morbid, but because of these like kind of dark, scary times, you always have these amazing stories of men and women who kind of stand up and make a difference, and those are the ones that have always just inspired me. And so kind of deep diving into church history, there's many people like that. And so I started my debut novel came out last January, and that was the story of St. Valentine, and during a marriage ban, and how he stood up for marriage and love and risked his life for that.
Okay, I know nothing about St. Valentine that we get Valentine's Day from, correct?
Yes.
That right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, so I just want to say, so Christie Award winner from that book.
Yep.
And in that category was Julie Clausen and
Yes.
Laura Franz. And Jamie won the Christie Award.
Yeah.
That's great company to be in.
Oh, when I saw that I was finaling with Laura Franz and Julie, I was like, well, at least I won't need to be giving the speech because I'm not winning. So that was a shock, but
all right.
It was amazing.
So can you go into a little more detail on that book?
Yeah, so it's the story set in 270. Emperor Claudius II outlaws marriage, and Valentine is the leader of a secret church by night and a public notary basically by day. And he was basically a contract lawyer. He would draw up marriage contracts and all kinds of things. So, he's kind of banned from allowing people to get married, so the emperor can pass a, military draft. And unmarried men were the only ones allowed in the military. So to outlaw marriage first and then kind of keep them from being able to escape a military draft. But he believes that will bring a breakdown in society. And so he begins to marry couples in secret and becomes an outlaw and the most wanted man in Rome. And he meets the daughter of a Roman jailer, and their friendship kind of sparks a whole series of events that ends up changing our calendars on February 14th.
Awesome. So how do you do research for that? Where do you find information on that time period?
Yeah, thankfully there's so many resources on ancient Rome because that's just a super popular era for people to research. So there's a ton of information, but there's not a lot on St. Valentine. So there's just a couple little, legends about him, and they kind of conflict a little bit. So I started piecing together, okay, here's all the stories about St. Valentine. We don't know which ones are true or not, but like how can I fit the most of these stories in and kind of operate from, if all these things are true about him, how does this fit into what we know about Roman culture at the time, the history of the time? So I kind of started with his stories, set them into the culture and the history of Rome at the time, and then kind of wove all the gaps with fiction.
Wow.
So
it sounds really hard to do for my brain.
I mean, it's kind of nice because you don't have to like look at a blank page and make everything up. So it's like, okay, I have a framework here. How can I now? Like, what kind of person would he have had to be to do all those things? So it's kind of fun to investigate, like, what kind of personality would he have had to have to do those things. But
very cool. And then you said you have another book coming out?
I had my second book released in February.
Okay.
And that one's called As Sure as the Sea, and it's the story of St. Nicholas. So that one's set in the Greek side of the Roman Empire, on the shores of the Mediterranean, white beaches, just paradise. And then we have the stories of St. Nicholas and the persecution under Emperor Diocletian and how he uses his wealth to kind of keep the church alive during this time when they can't buy or sell. And he teams up with a female diver that's her job, is to dive for and harvest coral, which they used for jewelry. So those two kind of need to work together, because when Nicholas comes to town, he sinks his inheritance. So.
And then how about down the road? What do you have?
Down the road, I just turned in book 3, and that one's called Daughter of the Rebellion. And it's the story of a Visigoth warrior woman who is captured and sold to a Roman gladiator school. And she becomes a very famous gladiatrix in Rome. And it's kind of the story of the end and the ban of gladiator games in Rome. So.
Wow. I'm finding another genre that I need to start reading. So, wow, those sound great. Okay, so my last question I've been asking is, there's lots of things that a person can believe in. Why do you choose Jesus?
He is the way. If you just looking through my family and just seeing how God has, we have the Bible, and we have the story of, salvation and how we are separated from God, and that God made a way for us to be with Him. And that kind of love is just overwhelming. And then just to see God pursuing my parents, just seeing Him throughout my whole family history, just calling and calling and calling, and just that kind of love. And it's a story that just, you can't make that up. And you just see Him throughout all of history, and just, He's so personal and He's so close. And
yeah, personal, and if you invite Him in, right?
Life-changing, and just,
I know this is hard to
it's
put to
hard
words
to put to words sometimes. But yeah.
Awesome. So Jamie, if people want to learn more about you, about your books, where can they find you?
My website is jamieogle.com. That's JAMIEOGLE.com. And there's links to all of my social media. You can join my newsletter list, find out information on all my books and upcoming events.
Well, and on your website, I found it interesting. You wrote about your grandparents, and you said you grew up listening to your grandparents tell stories from their youth, stories of fighting in World War II, panning for gold in Alaska, crossing the Nebraska prairies in a covered wagon during the Great Depression, and gypsies. Who are your grandparents for one? Jeez.
One set grew up in southern Minnesota. They had a big dairy farm, and my grandma was like the founder's daughter of the town. So like they had the big house and they had electricity, and then she married a poor farmer. So like she moved into a house with no electricity. She was scared of the dark, and just like all the adventures, she didn't really go anywhere, but like the adventures came to her. So she told these stories of, the gypsy caravan coming through, and they would play with the kids and just barter, and just have all those kinds of things. And then on my other side, that grandma was very adventurous, and she married a man, and they immediately went to Alaska and panned for gold and lived in the bush and got held up at gunpoint and robbed and left for dead, and they made their way out. Like, just all these crazy stories. And
I was wondering, are you going to write about those? Because I'd really like to hear more about them.
That would be amazing. I would love to do that someday. I haven't started anything, but they're always kind of in the back of my mind, like, how can I work all these things together? But
okay, well, I think that's a goal you need to set. Well, Jamie, I appreciate you joining me today and being on the show, and I'm excited to dive into your books and learn more about St. Valentine and St. Nicholas.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.